Josephine.
Thank you. So I first met Philip in 1998 when I went to present to the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And, to this day, I thank him for making me feel welcome and legitimate and credible and allowing us or helping us to come and present a different view of what Canada was up to in 1998 following 1995. And I should say that, he steered the committee at that time to make some very accurate and penetrating concluding observations that some people in Canada didn't appreciate, but those of us who were advocating for economic rights certainly did. And I must say that, having taken a deeper look into Mr. Alston's career, I'm just doubly and triply impressed with everything that you've done, Mr. Alston. In addition to being in a variety of universities, Tufts, Harvard Law School, being at the European University Institute, teaching at New York School of Law. He's now the co-chair of the Law School Center for Human Rights and Global Justice, and couldn't be a better person to do that. In addition to being the chair of the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, he was a special rapporteur around executions and death penalties, which is got to be one of the most painfully challenging things to work on. Wow, you've faced a lot of really difficult issues and been so bold and so courageous. As a special rapporteur on poverty, you had the courage and the fortitude to go and confront the United States and the UK, which, I'm grateful for, because when I was in international organizing, it was so hard for the rest of the world to understand that we really do have issues in North America. And of course, they've been getting worse ever since. But we've been so grateful for your work over the years, because you've helped to verify what we've been trying to say to our own governments, our own public, and the world. Because, poverty and the suffering of people in Canada and the United States has been swept under the rug for so long. Hard to do that nowadays, but still a strange issue. At any rate, there was so many incredible things you've done, and you've written some really powerful and very important works, which I would encourage everybody to learn and study, because the continued efforts to see economic, social, and cultural rights as actual serious human rights that require redistribution, that require real policies that are accountable, that have mechanisms for redress and the like, continues to be ever more important. And I think once the madness current time that we're in blows over, I think the work that you've done is going to lay the groundwork for a much better future as people sort of wake up and realize, oh yes, actually, this really matters. So I just can't say enough about how much I appreciate everything you've done for all of us. Thank you so much, Mr. Alston.
Well, thanks very much to all of you, to Joe, to Ben and Sheila, for the invitation to be with you today. I will make a few comments that I hope are not too disjointed. I think we need to reflect very briefly on the world that we're living in. And I don't just mean the battle over tariffs, which of course has dealt a serious blow to Canada and led to major confrontations and deep fears about what the potential impact might be. One has the sense that the US is in the process of backing down from a lot of those tariffs, and hopefully things will look better on that front, which is why I want to focus on very different developments that are going on. I think that the Trump administration is genuinely radical or even revolutionary in terms of its aspirations and so far of all of its actions. and that we are going to see a very different world emerging, not one that we can simply restore after the US midterm elections or after the next US presidential election. It's very easy to destroy a major and complex building that has been put up, but it's extremely challenging to rebuild it, particularly when much has happened in the meantime, which I think is the situation we'll be in when Trump leaves government. I think perhaps the biggest impact in a way is has some silver lining to it, and that is that the Trump administration, in its disdain for all existing, for the status quo in so many respects, has almost forced comprehensively new thinking to be undertaken. Not that a lot of that has yet happened, but because the old assumptions have been challenged so deeply, I think we're going to need to rethink pretty dramatically. I won't talk about the impact on international institutions other than to say that it's likely that there will be a much more major confrontation with international institutions once the administration really starts to focus on those. And that was deferred by a presidential executive order which called for an examination of the UN and all international institutions in the classic language to see whether they comply with America's national interests or not. But already the United Nations itself is implementing cuts of 20% to the organization, which will transform its ability to contribute in many ways. It will transform, I think, the ways in which the human rights and humanitarian and other systems are able to function. But I won't go into that now because we're here to talk more about developments at the national level in Canada and where the basic income debate might fit in. I think that a good starting point, for me at least, is to emphasize the importance of a vision and of values. Now, I'm going to point to an exemplary illustration in that respect, from which I think we can all learn, but it's a source that you won't be expecting. It's the 800-page Project 2025 report by the Heritage Foundation. And most of you will have heard of it. I suspect not a lot of us will have read it, but it's very instructive. And I just want to read a little bit from it. The introduction, which is written by the head of the project as a whole. And some of you may know that this Project 25 really does contain the blueprint that is being implemented now by the Trump administration across a wide range of areas. And the reason why the administration has been able to move so quickly and so determinedly is in large measure because all the steps are laid out very clearly in this gigantic volume. But it starts off by saying that our work reflects the work of the entire conservative project because we have brought together all of the major mainstream and other conservative voices in the country. And what we need to do with this agenda is to cut through, and I'm quoting now, cut through superficial distractions and focus on the moral and foundational challenges that America faces. End of quote. And in order to do that, the project lays out at the very beginning 4 basic principles. And I mean, one could spend a lot of time reflecting on these principles, but that's not my goal. My goal is to suggest that progressive movements need themselves to have something equivalent to this, because the campaigns in the United States were, of course, all over the place. Trump is famous for meandering, for going off on tangents, for distracting by bringing in irrelevant issues and so on. Elon Musk has been accused of acting chaotically and without any serious plan in mind and so on. I think all of those analyses are completely wrong. I think there is a very clear vision, and I think it was encapsulated in the statement in this project. So let me just give you the 4 principles. First, restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. 2, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. 3, defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. And 4, secure our God-given individual rights to live freely. So the point that I'm trying to make is simply that this is a very succinct statement which invokes a number of key themes that resonate with a wide range of audiences. And this, in many ways, is the sort of much broader message that is being conveyed. So talking about the family, children, self-governance, sovereignty, God-given individual rights to live freely. Now, if you ask progressives in most countries, most Western countries, including Canada, I think they would be hard-pressed to come up with the counter vision that was as global and as effectively designed to appeal to as many diverse and diffuse constituencies as this sort of statement. Now, I'd love to go through these 4 principles with you and talk about what they actually mean in practice, but that's not the point. The point that I want to make is that a lot of those on the progressive side of politics have engaged for a very long time on specific issues which we tend to silo. That can be, it can be gender rights, gender equality. It can be LGBT rights. It can be anti-poverty. It can be anti-global warming or pro appropriate climate change policies. It can be whatever. But there isn't often a vision of the just society that is presented as a foundation for what each of us is doing in our own area. And I think we need to start thinking much more directly about how one can convey the deeper values that underpin what I would think of, at least as a human rights inspired vision. I won't say more about that, but the reason I'm mentioning it here is that this is where I think basic income comes in, because basic income, as you know better than I do, has a great many diverse meanings and is linked to radically different programs these days. Just a brief aside, when I look at what has been done in the name of the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk's Doge, what I see again is a very clear agenda, which I would reduce to two items, although it clearly goes well beyond this. But one is really the, as the Heritage Foundation put it, is the destruction of the administrative state. But that means the destruction of the capacity to regulate, the capacity to generate public information on the basis of which policies can be made, and the destruction of accountability. And the second element is the privatization of the economy, partly in the interests of Musk and the other leading tech industry people, but much more broadly, because when we see, and I'll just take one maybe bizarre example, but the Doge cuts are in the process of destroying the agency that runs the national park system. Now, the national park system is not going to disappear. It's not going to be let to go to rack and ruin. Someone's going to have to look after it. So that task will, by necessity, fall to the private sector. And that means that national parks are going to be up for various forms of exploitation while maintaining a certain degree of their traditional function. But they're going to be run for profit. They're going to be run at the state level. They're going to be subject to a much wider array of exploitative political and economic forces. And I think that's what's going to happen more comprehensively in the American economy. And the argument that I want to suggest to you, and this is, I imagine that Canadians would and should push back, is that these sorts of policies are going to end up being much more influential in our own countries. I'm Australian, as you may know, than we would expect. There is a clear demonstration effect. There are many ways internationally of promoting the sorts of agendas that have radically taken over in the United States. So all of that is to say that I think the need for a return to values, the need for a program that is going to appeal more broadly to different constituencies on the progressive side of politics. And that, of course, is where the basic income guarantee could and should come in. It also has implications for a lot of the debates that many of you have been involved in as to what shape that should take. And I guess it's fair to say that there is a particular risk at this point of time for those advocates of basic income coming from the seemingly ever increasing power of the tech industry. The destruction by Musk and his allies of the administrative state is, I think, able to be reconciled by him. Not that I expect he has too many nights staying awake wondering how to justify these things, but if he does, he would go quickly back to sleep because his expectation is that AI can resolve almost all of these issues, can perform most of these functions. So it's the classic techno-optimist perspective. Instead of all these bureaucrats and all of these agencies performing necessary functions, they can simply be taken care of by AI. Now, that has always been the mindset of the tech industry, basically. I did a lot of work on social welfare policies in the United Kingdom and the United States, as Joe mentioned, but also in a lot of other countries when I was UN Special Rapporteur. And what I saw there was under the guise of the so-called digitalization of welfare, is the introduction of a very different set of values into the welfare system, but done in a way that was not acknowledged because it was simply presented as, no, all we're doing is digitalizing the system. But digitalization comes with a whole form of values, and they are radically different from the values that have informed traditional systems that want to ensure the well-being of the entire community. So I think the resurgence, not even the resurgence, the continuing rise to dominance of techno optimist policies will come with a renewed emphasis on basic income from Sam Altman and the various other libertarians who have put forward this vision. Obviously, that's not what I have in mind when I talk about a return to values, the value of a community that guarantees the basic well-being of all of its members, not simply the seeking to ensure that they don't all die as a result of automation and the radical effects of climate change, which of course is now no longer an issue. And when I mention international pressures on countries like Canada, one of the things that is truly stunning is the extent to which the World Bank has, as the Americans say, turned on a dime, done a 180-degree turn, and climate change is no longer one of the major preoccupations of the World Bank because the United States doesn't like that. So I think that we're all going to be subject to a lot of different forms of pressure from international and other institutions, which are pushing agendas that are not consistent with the values that I would see underlying a basic income guarantee. I'm sorry that I've ranged across a very broad terrain, but I thought it might be useful since I'm not the expert that all of you are in terms of basic income debates in Canada, just to put some of the broader issues that I've been thinking about over the last couple of months. So I'll leave it at that. I think I've used up my allocated time, and I'm happy to talk further if there are any questions or whatever, but over to you.
Okay, over to you, Ben. Do people have questions for?
Yeah,
Oh,
Rob. Yeah, there's a hand up. Whose hand's up?
and Josephine's hand is up.
Josephine. And I saw Rob. I don't know. Rob had a question as well. So there's Rob. Rob Rayner. Sorry, Rob. Let me find you. And then Rob, if you can talk now if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mr. Alston. It was very, very interesting. I think the advocacy for basic income is taking place in Canada and elsewhere around the world around, I would say, increasingly swirling, mounting events that are all kind of linking together to, in my view, create a more intense global crisis on many fronts. And I think one of those is, in fact, around artificial intelligence. And in the Q&A, I put a link to a New York Times interview that was published yesterday. The interview was done by one of their columnists, Ross Douthat, I think is how you pronounce his last name. And it's with an AI expert. And this expert, with several other colleagues, have published a document called AI 2027, where they basically say that sometime in 2027 or 2028, just 2 or 3 years away, we will have reached the point of artificial general intelligence, super intelligence, where the technology is basically running away from the ability of human beings to understand what it's doing, let alone control it. And in that interview, they do talk a little bit about universal basic income, because one of the impacts of this runaway intelligence is predicted to be, by these experts, massive, massive, massive labor displacement and loss. Almost starting with computer programmers, ironically, that computer programming will no longer be something humans can do because AI can do it 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times better and faster. Anyways, I'm just wondering if you've given thought about that whole issue of AI, obviously, which has huge implications for human rights and the functioning of democracy, but also just simply for social security, if there's going to be widespread labor disruption. And the two people who were in the dialogue in the New York Times talk about universal basic income. In other words, a basic income that almost flows to everybody, which is not something we in Canada tend to focus on. We tend to focus on what we call income-tested basic income, using the income tax system to sort of determine how basic income should be allocated to people when they most need that financial support. So anyways, just if you have any high-level thoughts perhaps on the interface between AI and basic income, I would appreciate that.
Yes, I mean, I think on your last point, the universal basic income and the vision that they have. I was actually reading recently an article that's been published in the Chicago Law Review by one of my colleagues at NYU, in fact, Daniel Hamill, and it is apparently very sympathetic to the idea of a basic income and so on, but it does all the calculations that we should be well aware of, which says, well, of course, if you eliminate Social Security, you would save this much. If you eliminate healthcare, you'd save that much. Of course, we're not suggesting that. That would probably be politically unpopular. But nonetheless, the broad thrust is that their form of UBI would end up replacing quite a lot of the social programs that most of us think are very important. I think, I mean, AI is such a puzzling area because there's been a lot of hype about it. There's a lot of utopian stuff about how it will be able to take over so many functions. I don't doubt for a moment that it is transforming the world. I think the main problem I have, and this is a very simple response to your complex question, is that AI doesn't come with any stated underlying values, but in fact, it is heavily value laden because it devalues human interaction. It reduces the notion of well-being to artificial forms. There's a quote that our friend blank moment who started Facebook, what's his name, Mark Zuckerberg. Our friend Zuckerberg said recently that there's a lot of studies to show that most of us would like to have quite a significant number of friends, maybe 15 friends or whatever. But the average person has 3 or less friends. But you shouldn't be too worried about that because AI is going to resolve it. No, this is serious though. There will be avatars, etc., who will be able to respond very meaningfully to whatever the concerns or interests that you have are. And of course, that we can laugh at that, but that's what is going to be proposed in terms of care for the elderly, care for all sorts of people who need interaction. They're going to instead either be given their robots or their chatbots or both, and huge savings are then going to be announced in terms of the sort of human care that was once provided. But that's all very much implicit in the AI project, and there are very few voices pushing back against it and insisting that the humanization of human relations and society should be the predominant starting point. And I think that the number of progressive voices that are really looking at the ways in which AI could or should be developed are quite limited. Most of the things that I have read go no further than what I've just said. In other words, they say there's a huge amount to be gained. There are big threats, and we must guard against those and ensure that we remain, humane towards one another. But that's not a vision. And meanwhile, the vision of the technocratic industry in the tech area is moving ahead at huge speed and without any regulation of any meaningful type. So governments have, there are bills being introduced. I think part of the current debate over the US budget has involved a proposal by Republicans that all legislation at the state and local level seeking to regulate AI be banned. This is in the interests of competitiveness. The United States needs to get ahead on AI, and we can't have individual states or local communities saying this is not how we want AI to function. So in fact, the sort of initiatives that are being taken are going in very much the opposite direction. Anyway, enough. I will look at the Duterte interview. I can't bear Duterte, but he's smart and he interviews some interesting people.
So thanks, Philip. Josephine had a question. Josephine,
I see, hang on a sec, am I muted? I see Rob had a question. I see one other participant question, and I'm looking at the time.
yeah.
So I'm hoping we can be quick.
So Josephine's next on the list. So,
Okay,
yeah.
and then
Go ahead.
Kathleen.
Then Kathleen, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Joe. Volume. We can't hear you.
I can't unmute. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. So thank you, Philip. These are sobering thoughts, but I do want to point out that, Canada is a different country, and perhaps we have this new opportunity to break away and break the chains of being under US influence and establish our own direction, identity. And we were traditionally a champion of human rights. John Humphreys, who wrote the UDHR, was Canadian. And I think this is actually a great moment to reclaim that and to center basic income as a way of demonstrating our commitment to human rights as different from the directions that the United States is taking. The question actually I had for you is a little odd, perhaps, but having been to New York, the UN in New York numerous times, and recognizing that it's also pretty close to sea level, I've long thought that really we should relocate the headquarters to Toronto. And now that US has, decided it has no time or interest in the UN, maybe that's a way of sort of doing a quick flip the script. That's how I'm looking at this moment in time and history, both with how we direct AI, which I'm trying to train AI on human rights personally, by the way. But maybe we can use these the madness of the United States to flip the script. And you in the United States, do you think people in positions like yourself can sort of help to move the needle in a different direction by supporting Canada in becoming the better example, and perhaps even relocating the North American headquarters?
Toronto would never work. It's too clean, it's too organized. It doesn't have what New York City has. I don't know if the Trump people will be foolish enough to really want to strangle the UN and get it out of the city. Don't know. I suppose if Trump focuses on the real estate potential, he might be interested in moving it out. I mean, I think the main point I take really from your comment is that Canada has done things differently in the past, has always distinguished itself, and the reaction to the 51st state was in principle a fundamental rejection, I think.
Yeah.
No, but I think of a lot of American values, and values that are not admirable ones, which manifest themselves in the welfare area and in a sense of solidarity and community and so on. And I very much hope that there will be a doubling down on that. What I think I was trying to say earlier is that there's a risk that will be increasingly difficult, but I very much hope it will be the case.
Well, let's work together, because the other thing is we signed all the treaties and we ratified everything, and the US did not. They ratified one.
Yeah.
The one you worked on so hard, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, was not even signed by them. They're the only country besides a broken state to not do so.
No, you're wrong. Somalia has signed it now.
Okay, there you go. They're not caring about the rights of the child, and
Right.
kinds of narratives I think we all can now engage in to point out that we let them have their breakdown. Meanwhile, the rest of the world, let's move forward in a much better direction now that they no longer have as much influence and control as they've had. So that would be the way I would hope, and maybe work with you to help make that happen.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's it in terms of questions. There were some comments.
Oh, I saw one. Yeah, the comments are really interesting.
Yeah, the
Maybe
comments are good, but I'm just wondering.
maybe we'll do a poll to move UN headquarters to Toronto. And see what comes out across the country. I do see one hand raised though from
Oh,
my
I see it now. Yep, Myron. I'll
that one. Okay, so this will be the last question, and then we will move quickly into other parts of the program. Okay.
So
Thank you. I came late. Where how to get my picture on? Anyways, I think that's a serious question of moving to the UN because I think that's not, and I think Toronto's the wrong place because Toronto is already too concentrated in Canada. I, as far as basic income goes, I've always thought the basic income is needed to replace the power that's being lost by the unions. The unions don't have any power anymore because labor is dispensable because we have. So how about I've always raised that question of basic income is needed because unions have lost their power.
mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is there's no question that the breaking of the power of the unions has been a key ingredient in enabling the triumph of neoliberal policies. It started in the US, but the gig economy and other developments related to AI have again shifted those sorts of policies from the United States to the rest of the world. And that's really what I mean by AI not coming with a political platform, as it were. You know, the proponents of AI didn't say we have to smash union power, and that's why you should support us. They simply said there are ways of doing this more efficiently. And so we're going to digitalize it, and we're going to set up a system that really marginalizes unions and exploits labor
I
much
think
more
unions
effectively.
have lost their power, and with the post office as an example of that in Canada, um, it needs a complete restructuring because it needs a complete restructuring, not just it can't survive as it is. They're in an impasse, right? And there has to be an alternative for unions, I believe. And I think basic income is that alternative.
Good, good.
And that's because of technology why post office has lost its power, because very few people mail up carrot letter by Canada by mail anymore. It's all by technology, right? So
Well, I
technology
think
that
there's a big proposal to privatize the US Postal Service. But what's fascinating about that is that they don't propose to privatize the mail delivery because that's a money loser, but they will privatize the parcel delivery because that is a business that is thriving thanks to technology, thanks to online commerce, Amazon, etc. So yeah,
well, the liberal principle is you don't do anything if the government doesn't do anything that other people that the private industry can do. That's the
right,
principle
right,
of
right.
liberalism. Uh, way back from basic liberalism, not neoliberalism, right? If government can't do it, then the government can do it. Otherwise, the government can't do it. It's only if the government can't do it, and
Yeah.
the private industry can't do it.
The key question there is what is it? What is to be done? What needs to be done? And if you reduce that to the provision of a sort of basic commercial service, then of course the private sector can do it. If you see the post office as performing a lot of social functions, and I won't go into those, but then it is clear that the private sector will not do those and would not want to do them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Reverend Philip.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to step in now and just offer our profound thanks to Philip. You've given us so much to think about. And like a lot of it sounds pretty terrifying, but I think there are optimistic notes there, and there are things that we can do. And I actually think Canada is in a good position to do some of these. And our movement is pretty solid. So, and we're building allies. So I think we're on the right track. And yeah, I don't think fast on my feet, but you've given me a lot to reflect on, and I hope others too. And I hope we can continue the discussion and look at how we build forward in Canada. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks to all of you. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm sure that you can play a very important role in the months and years ahead. Good luck with that.
Fingers crossed.
Okay.